Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today I'm going to be doing an original tag. This is called the High School Required Reading Tag. This is an original tag that was created by Nicole at Noteworthy Fiction and by Alex at Stay at Home Reader. I believe that Alex and Nicole are engaging in a project, an upcoming project, where they're going to revisit some of the works that they were required to read in high school. I'm just going to read what Nicole said in her video. I was tagged by Nicole at Noteworthy Fiction. So thank you, Nicole, for tagging me. And thank you, Nicole and Alex, for creating this really delightful tag. So this is what Nicole said in her video. My first tag video, and it's about high school required reading lists. This is an original tag video reflecting on the books we read or were supposed to read in high school. I've listed the prompts below in case you want to do this tag video yourself. Be sure to tag me in your video so that I can watch yours too. And I'm going to include Nicole and Alex's videos in the notes below. So I hope that you check out both of their videos, check out their delightful channels. So here we go. The prompts. Number 1, high school crush. Name a book you were assigned in high school and loved at the time. Have you reread it and did it hold up? Well, this is going to come as no surprise. This is a standard high school reading that I loved, and I actually had read it long before high school, and I loved it then. This is Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. I first read this book when I was in the 4th grade, when I learned about it through the movie that my oldest brother, had to watch for school. He was reading the book, and they were assigned to watch the movie on TV at home. This was the 60s, and I watched it with my whole family, and I fell in love with the movie, and then I found this book on my parents' bookshelf. I've shown this in many videos. This is a first edition of Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, and I read this book in the 4th grade, and I fell in love with it. We then read it in high school. We read it in 9th grade, so that was a reread for me, but I was probably, that was a more appropriate time to read it, and I continued to love it. It's one of the reasons I wanted to become an English teacher. It's a book I've read many times because it is a book that we taught. We taught it in the 8th grade in the first school where I taught, and we taught it in the 10th grade. In the 9th grade in the school where I taught for the next 30 some odd years. So I've read it many times, and yes, it does hold up. I know that there are some now that are criticizing this book and wanting to take it out of school curriculum, and I think that that's a mistake. I think that you can add complementary texts. I would not take this Pulitzer Prize winning novel out of a curriculum if I had any say about it. Number 2, gym class. Name a book you were assigned that you hated. Have or would you give it a second chance? There were not many books that we were assigned that I hated. One that I certainly didn't love, though, was in 10th grade we read Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, and I think that it was just too difficult for that time. I've reread it many times since, and I absolutely do really appreciate this novel, but it's not a novel that I loved in high school. I don't know that most kids love this book in high school. As a teacher myself, we did teach it for a long time, and we ultimately made the decision that it was probably not a great choice for our American Lit course, and we eventually stopped teaching it and opted instead to introduce Nathaniel Hawthorne through some of his really really wonderful short stories. I just think that the prose was too difficult for a lot of kids, and I think that I think that we could introduce we could and did introduce Hawthorne through shorter works. I think this is a book probably best introduced later, either later in high school or in college. I think it can be better appreciated at that time. Okay, number 3, locker combo. Is there a book you remember having to read but can't actually remember? Yes, there is. Most of the things that I read in high school were very formative for me, and they are things that I remember. But I remember that in 10th grade, we read Arthur Miller's play, A View from the Bridge. I remember reading it. I remember the experience of the class. I remember things that went on in the class around the time that we read it. I can't remember the play at all. I have revisited Arthur Miller many times. I taught Arthur Miller myself, but I don't know that I ever revisited A View from the Bridge, and for the life of me, I can't remember a thing about it. Okay, number 4, horror, Cliff Notes. Was there a book you were supposed to read but didn't? No, there was not. I always read what I was supposed to read. Any book that was assigned in English all through high school, college, graduate school, I read it. I can't say that I remember every single one of them, but I do remember most, except for A View from the Bridge. But I always did my homework. I always read what I was supposed to read. So there you go. Number 5, electives. Did you read just for fun? And what book or books were you reading outside of your assignments? Well, yes, I absolutely read for fun. I've been reading for fun for my whole life. First of all, a book that I talk about, ad nauseum on the channel is J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. This is a book that I read for fun. I just brought down one of my older copies. I have many copies of this. I never read this in a high school class. This was not in the curriculum when I was in high school. That didn't come to the curriculum until much later. A friend gave me this in the 8th grade. I read it. I fell in love with it, as you know, because I've been talking about it so much. And then I went and I read everything by J.D. Salinger. I read 9 stories by J.D. Salinger just for fun. I read Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger just for fun. I read Raise High the Roof Beam Carpenters and Seymour An Introduction just for fun. So I read all of Salinger for fun. I had older brothers, so I was often reading kind of, outside my age group. I was introduced to Jack Kerouac by my oldest brother, and I remember being in maybe 10th grade and reading On the Road and Dharma Bums. I don't have copies of those. I read all of Tolkien because of my oldest brother. And this is, I've shown this before, this is a box set that he gave me for Christmas in 1973. So that's something that I read for fun. I read on my own initially a whole bunch of books by Hermann Hesse. I have here Siddhartha. I remember also reading Damien. I was on a real kick for a while. And these were, I don't think these were ever taught in school. We did teach Siddhartha in one course in the last school where I taught for the last 30 plus years. But when I was in high school, we were not, this was not being taught. Okay. Rebound. Number six. Number six is Rebound. What book would you replace from the typical assigned reading list? Well, because I was a high school English teacher for almost 40 years, I have a lot of experience with required reading lists and revising them. And I will tell you what we did. We revised our curriculum every 5 years. We did a complete review of the curriculum for every course every 5 years. And some courses we would completely, redo. We would change the focus. And I think that's really healthy. That was how we decided actually to sort of stop pushing the Scarlet Letter and to get to Hawthorne through short stories instead. And I think that was the right way to go. But we did that with every course. I'm not big on throwing out classics, but I was very big on looking for complementary texts, more modern texts to accompany, to serve as companions to a classic text. We were always looking to diversify the curriculum. We were always looking at ways to bring in voices, modern voices, contemporary voices, voices from different cultures, and more women as well, because the traditional curriculum was sorely lacking in voices of women. Okay, so I don't know if I'm answering that question or not. I'm kind of telling you what I did in my career, and I would recommend that for any high school curriculum. Keep looking at it, keep reviewing it. It's not written in stone. It should be a living document. Okay, number 7, Teacher's Pet. What book got you excited about reading for class? Well, as I just talked about, To Kill a Mockingbird, when we did finally come to read it in high school, this was probably the best thing that I read in the 9th grade. And, it was a reread for me, but it was a book that I loved reading in that class and got me excited for English in the 9th grade. In the 10th grade, we read The Great Gatsby, and I fell in love with this book. I've talked about this a lot because I've been talking about it this past month because it was just the 100th anniversary of the publication of The Great Gatsby. But I remember having this assigned on a Friday in 10th grade, and we were told to read it for Monday. And I remember going home. I remember where I was in my house. I remember reading it and not being able to stop. I remember absolutely falling in love and then going off on a tangent and reading a whole bunch of things by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This book made me decide in the 10th grade that I was going to major in English, and reinforced that idea that I wanted to teach literature. That was 10th grade. In 11th grade, I fell in love with Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. I know that some people have really struggled with this book. Not everyone loves Wuthering Heights. Some people who even love the Brontes prefer Jane Eyre to Wuthering Heights. I'm kind of even with Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, but this was my introduction to the Brontes, and it was my introduction to serious British literature. And I was a reader. I fell in love with this, and I've reread it many times. I read it again in college. I read it in graduate school. I have been, my department gave me a beautiful edition of this as a gift, and it's signed by all of them. I mean, it's just a book that I've come back to over and over again in my life. So that was 11th grade. In 12th grade, I took a Shakespeare seminar. And this was my first complete works of Shakespeare that my mother bought for me for Christmas when I was in high school. We certainly didn't read the complete works of Shakespeare, but we read representative samples of the tragedies, the comedies, the histories, and the problem plays. And that was my 12th grade English, and I just adored it. And I would teach Shakespeare, in all of the courses that well, not all of the courses. I taught it in 9th grade, I taught it in 10th grade, I taught it in 11th grade, depending on what school I was in, and I taught it to seniors, and taught comedies, histories, tragedies, and a couple of the problem plays. So Shakespeare has long been a part of my life, but in 12th grade, that was the Shakespeare seminar that I took, was certainly a highlight of my senior year. Okay, number 8, study hall. What was the most difficult book you read in high school? That is the one that you spent the most time reading. Well, I can remember in high school doing an independent reading for, I think every month we had to read something on our own. This was in 11th grade. You had to do an independent reading. And I had found a copy of Albert Camus' The Stranger, and I read it for one of those independent readings that we had to do one month. And, I don't know that I really understood it. I remember I had found a paperback copy of it at a library book sale. But I read it for this independent, monthly reading that we had to do. And then later that year, we had to do, the 11th grade research paper, which was a gigantic project where you were supposed to read several works by an author, develop a research topic, develop a thesis statement from that topic, and then write a research paper. And I decided that I needed to know more about this. I needed to really figure out what this was about. And so I picked Albert Camus as the subject of my 11th grade research project. And I remember reading Camus' essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, and I read his play Caligula, and I reread The Stranger, and I read his novel, The Plague. So I worked out some thesis statement that allowed me to write about and research all of those works. And I remember that we worked on this project for several months. I want to say it was like from the winter until, almost the end of 11th grade. So that probably is the most serious topic that I undertook in high school, and probably the most rigorous reading project that I undertook. Okay, number 9, nails on a chalkboard. What was the book that made you groan when you found out you'd have to read it again? That never happened. We never repeated books. I know in Nicole's video, she talked about how almost every year some part of Great Expectations by Dickens was introduced or reintroduced. And that was a very, very unique idea to me. We had very distinct curriculum for each grade. And I don't ever remember, I reread books, like I reread To Kill a Mockingbird in the 9th grade because I had read it on my own in the 4th grade. But in terms of what we were required to read, I don't ever remember that happening in my high school, in my entire high school career. And I know, having run a department for 25 of the 40 years that I taught, we absolutely did not repeat books from one year to another. We had a very distinct curriculum for every grade, and we revised that in a 5-year cycle. So it never happened to me. I am an avid rereader now. On my own, I constantly revisit books that I love, but I was never required to read the same book twice in high school. Okay. Number 10, extra credit. What book do you think should be added on to every high school reading list? I would like to see this year's Pulitzer Prize winning novel in fiction. I would like to see Percival Everett's novel, James. I would like to see this introduced in 12th grades. I think that this is a book that we all should be reading, and we all should be talking about it. And I am going to suggest that we keep The Adventures of Huck Finn and that we read it alongside James. You know, this is not a retelling of Huck Finn. This is a reimagination of the life of one of the characters in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Jim is a slave in this novel, and he's treated with the greatest disrespect and really just a total lack of dignity. And yet he is the hero of this novel. Here he gets his own story. He tells his own story. And I think this is certainly the most important book that I read last year. I think it's one of the most important books that's been written in certainly in this 21st century. But I would like to see these two books read and studied together. Huck Finn is a novel that is often challenged, and it's been challenged since it was first written. And I think sometimes the reasons that people are challenging it show that they haven't actually read the book. I just this weekend heard again an interview with Percival Everett. It's an older interview, but it was being replayed this weekend on the radio because he just won the Pulitzer Prize for this novel. And he said in that interview that he believes that he wrote the book that Mark Twain never could have written, but that he believes that he is in dialogue with Twain. And I think Twain would have loved Percival Everett's novel if he were able to talk to us today. I would love to see us read those together. I would like to see us introduce a nonfiction work such as Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy. I'd like to see us introduce that into a curriculum and perhaps read it alongside To Kill a Mockingbird, because it is a book about justice, the lack of justice, the miscarriages of justice, and I think it would be a really good companion piece for To Kill a Mockingbird. So that's kind of where I come down. I don't like to see us, throwing out a lot of classics because somebody objects to it today. I think we need to look at literature in the context in which it was written, in the time period in which it was written, but I like to introduce new voices and new perspectives and look at pieces together, as kind of, companion pieces. So that, and I'm talking from 40 years of teaching experience. Okay. Number 11, BFFs. Tag some people you'd like to hear answers from. Well, if you're watching this and you'd like to give this a go about what you were supposed to read or what you did read in high school, what you wish you could have read in high school, I would hope that you would consider yourself tagged, and please do this. But, as I always do, I'm going to tag some people in the notes below. I think this is a really, really thought-provoking tag. I certainly loved putting it together, and I'd love to hear the thoughts of some other people as well. So thank you again, Alex and Nicole, for creating this terrific tag, and thank you, Nicole, for tagging me. So, as always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.